For decades, scientists argued over one core question with massive implications for human identity. When did the first people reach the Americas? For almost a century, no one knew the definitive answer. The mystery remained open. The popular story was the Clovis timeline, which placed the first widespread culture in North America at about 13,000 years ago. That date was clean and easy. It gave researchers a clear starting point in the timeline. But the deeper problem never resolved itself. Evidence that seemed older than Clovis kept appearing, but every single piece was open to debate. Critics could always argue the dates were uncertain or the tools were moved by natural process, a phenomenon called disturbance. The field was missing a single, unambiguous sign of humans that was absolutely locked in place and tied to a solid date. Without that certainty, the debate never ended. Now, new evidence has settled this question completely, delivering the definitive answers this audience requires. The decades-long mystery is closed. The definitive proof that humans were in the Americas far earlier than 13,000 years ago came from ancient human footprints at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about the timeline of the first Americans. These prints are not objects that can be moved. They are not bones that can be mixed into older layers. They are a direct physical imprint of human behavior frozen in time. The human activity was recorded during the last glacial maximum, the deepest cold of the last ice age, which means an entire extra chapter must be added to the human story in the Americas. The first revelation is the nature of the evidence itself. White Sands is a landscape-scale archive, not just a small rock shelter. During the Ice Age, it was a large lake environment, and people walked along the muddy shoreline. When a person steps on wet clay, the weight creates a distinct track showing the shape of the foot, the depth of the step, and the walking stride. That track then dried and hardened. Later, gypsum sand moved in and buried the surface. That burial under the sand is a near-miss moment that preserved the tracks like a time capsule. Without that geological luck, the evidence would have eroded away, and we would still be guessing. The tracks found were clearly human. They match human feet, not hooves or claws or random fracture patterns. They show repeated occurrence and stride patterns that demonstrate normal activity, not a single accident. This confirms that people were present on that landscape, actively using the shoreline environment. The people were not alone. In the same surfaces, researchers documented tracks from extinct Ice Age megafauna, including mammoths and giant ground sloths. This anchors the human presence in a living ecosystem that existed during the last glacial maximum, about 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, when the climate was harsh. But footprints alone cannot answer the timeline question. The claim of 18,000 to 23,000 years ago forced the entire investigation to focus on absolute dating. The scientific team built their case piece by piece, starting with the first testable measurement. The initial dates that placed the footprints far earlier than Clovis came from radiocarbon dating of ancient seeds and pollen found in the soil directly alongside the footprints. Radiocarbon dating is a technique that measures how carbon-14 decays over time, acting like a chemical clock. Every living thing absorbs carbon-14, a radioactive form of carbon. When the organism dies, it stops absorbing it, and the carbon-14 then breaks down at a known rate. By measuring the remaining carbon-14, researchers can calculate the time since death. This technique is reliable for dates up to about 50,000 years. The seed and pollen analysis dated the prints to around 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. This is thousands of years before Clovis appeared at 13,000 years ago. This result immediately triggered pushback from scientists who were stunned. The critique focused on a legitimate methodological point. Could the seeds and pollen have been reworked or mixed into the layers after the footprints were made, thereby shifting the apparent age? This critique was a direct test of the chain of reasoning. If the dated plant material was not firmly tied to the footprint layer, the massive claim could be challenged. But instead of letting the case stall, the researchers responded with the only thing that closes a case, an independent line of evidence. This is the process of evidence hierarchy, where a weak claim is replaced by a stronger, cross-verified one. The team, led by archaeologist Vance Holliday, returned to the site for a much tighter link. They decided to radiocarbon date the ancient mud matrix surrounding the footprints. The mud matrix is the clay-rich sediment that was actually deformed by the human steps. Dating the structural sediment is a more direct link to the track-making event than dating loose plant remains nearby. The team used an independent laboratory to run these measurements, which is crucial for institutional credibility. The resulting ages were between 20,700 and 22,400 years. This window does not drift away from the original dates, it reinforces them. When three separate labs confirm the same result, the conclusion moves from theory to established fact. This alignment across different material types is the first smoking gun. Seeds and pollen are biological remains. Mud matrix is the sediment framework. They do not share the same vulnerabilities to contamination, yet they align perfectly. The case is airtight. This systematic timeline now connects the dots across an entire 10,000-year span. The White Sands footprint dates are settled between 20,700 and 22,400 years ago. The later Clovis culture then appears around 13,000 years ago. That gap is long enough for many generations, migrations, and cultural shifts. The timeline is no longer Clovis equals first. The complete picture shows humans present far earlier, with Clovis appearing later as one important, but not foundational expression. That ordering is now fixed by direct evidence. The evidence hierarchy is now complete and undeniable. First, the human-shaped footprints were observed at White Sands. Second, initial dating of seeds and pollen placed the prints around 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. Third, skeptics correctly questioned whether those botanical markers could introduce uncertainty. Fourth, the response was to date the mud matrix that directly surrounds and holds the footprints. Fifth, the mud dates, 20,700 to 22,400 years, replicated and aligned perfectly with the original window. Sixth, the convergence of evidence became irrefutable. 3 materials, 3 independent laboratories, and 55 total radiocarbon dates all converged on the same early occupation window. That is what closure looks like in science. This older timeline also connects 3 separate findings into one coherent system. The existence of pre-Clovis humans in New Mexico forces a major reevaluation of the possible migration routes. For a long time, the old theory assumed a single interior, ice-free corridor between the great ice sheets was the gateway. That corridor did not open until about 13,000 years ago. That is too late to explain human presence in New Mexico at 18,000 to 23,000 years ago. The old model simply cannot function anymore. The investigation then revealed the logical necessity of a coastal pathway. Parts of the Pacific coast along Alaska and British Columbia became ice-free by around 17,000 to 18,000 years ago. That is several thousand years earlier than the interior corridor. A coastal pathway does not rely on harsh inland ecosystems to become established. Instead, it uses the rich kelp forest ecosystems, which provide a continuous, reliable band of marine life, fish, and edible plants. This elegant systematic solution explains how people could bypass the ice-locked land and disperse southward early. The pieces finally fit together. This new model also corrects a popular misconception: the idea that early sites represent only one brief visit. While the White Sands data shows human presence by at least 20,700 years ago, evidence from the nearby Rimrock Draw rock shelter in Oregon shows long-term occupation. Stone tools found there date back to more than 18,000 years ago. This toolkit includes scrapers, chisels, and blades, indicating a sophisticated, adapted technology for specialized tasks. Use-wear analysis shows repeated use, meaning these tools were part of ongoing life, not single events. Furthermore, some rock shelters show an estimated continuous occupation lasting around 11,000 years, which demonstrates a deep, sustained commitment to the continent, not a fleeting stop. Another breakthrough revealed how these early people survived the Ice Age. The tools found in Oregon were used to butcher extinct Ice Age animals, including camels, bison, and horses. The definitive proof came from a second smoking gun: blood residue analysis. Researchers analyzed the microscopic cracks in stone flakes and found preserved animal proteins. They detected proteins from megafauna such as mammoths and mastodons. This direct chemical evidence links the tools to hunting or scavenging megafauna. This discovery changes everything because it shows a fully adapted culture that was exploiting Ice Age resources successfully. This evidence hierarchy, footprints, mud matrix dating, coastal route viability, and blood residue analysis, shows how the case was closed. The methodology transparency is essential to trust through verification. Radiocarbon dating, the chemical clock, provided absolute ages. The samples included seeds, pollen, and the actual mud matrix, with 3 independent labs confirming the ages. The consistent outcome across 55 dates reduces the chance of sampling error, eliminating simple dating errors. This is exactly how you would engineer a robust timeline revision. This is now confirmed. The old theory said Clovis at 13,000 years ago was the first entry. The new evidence proves humans arrived 18,000 to 23,000 years ago. This 5 to 10,000 year gap is not a minor tweak. It is a fundamental correction of the human timeline. The question that puzzled scientists for 50 years is answered. Here is the complete sequence of events, which allows for systematic pattern completion. Around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago was the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets covered most of Canada and sea levels were lower. Around 20,700 to 22,400 years ago, humans left footprints at White Sands, New Mexico. Around 17,000 to 18,000 years ago, parts of the Pacific coastline became viable, opening the coastal migration route. Around 13,000 years ago, the interior ice-free corridor finally opened, and the widely known Clovis culture appeared. This revised systematic timeline is mapped and now complete. You now know the real story before it reaches textbooks, because this discovery was published very recently. Most people still think Clovis was the first culture. Your knowledge is now cutting edge. This solved migration story is part of your origin, a story of an earlier adaptive movement along a coastal edge. Your ancestors were among the adaptive people who moved where the map allowed, not where tradition expected. This is literally where a key chapter of your human origins was written. The debate is over. The long-running uncertainty is gone. The dominant model is replaced. The timeline is revised. The migration story is corrected. The definitive evidence proves beyond doubt that humans were present in the Americas more than 18,000 years ago, fully adapted to Ice Age survival. Scientists have closed the case. The question is answered. We now have the complete picture.